There are places where history doesn't just whisper, it screams from beneath the soil. In the heart of Virginia's countryside stands a property that witnessed horrors beyond what most history books dare to mention. This is the story of Blackwood Estate, where during the darkest days of American slavery, knowledge itself became a death sentence. What you're about to discover challenges everything you thought you knew about plantation life in the antebellum South. This isn't just about the documented brutality of enslavement. This is about the deliberate erasure of truth, the systematic elimination of witnesses, and the secrets that were buried alongside those who dared to uncover them. Archaeological discoveries made less than a decade ago have confirmed what whispered stories suggested for generations. Some truths were considered too dangerous to live, and those who stumbled upon them paid the ultimate price. We invite you to share in the comments. Do you know of similar stories from your region? Have you heard accounts of truths deliberately buried by those in power? The year is 1842. Blackwood Estate sprawls across nearly 3,000 acres of Virginia's fertile Piedmont region, just 40 miles southwest of Richmond. The main house rises 3 stories high, a testament to Georgian colonial architecture with its symmetrical facade, tall white columns, and wide veranda that wraps around the entire first floor. The interior boasts hand-carved mahogany staircases imported from the Caribbean, crystal chandeliers from France, and wallpaper shipped directly from England. 15 rooms on the main floors, each more opulent than the last. Persian rugs cover polished hardwood floors. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors line the walls. Every detail screams wealth, respectability, refinement. But step outside, past the manicured gardens where magnolia trees bloom in spring, and the picture transforms entirely. Beyond the main house, the property extends into seemingly endless fields of cotton. During harvest season, the white bolls stretch to the horizon like a sea of clouds. The air hangs thick with humidity, the kind that makes breathing feel like drinking. Temperatures regularly climb past 95 degrees. There's no shade in those fields. The enslaved quarters sit a quarter-mile from the main house. 23 crude wooden structures, barely weatherproofed, each housing between 6 and 12 people. No windows, dirt floors, gaps between the planks wide enough to let in winter wind and summer mosquitoes. These aren't homes. They're holding pens for human beings treated as livestock. Colonel James Blackwood owns all of this. He inherited the property from his father in 1835 and has spent 7 years expanding operations. To his peers in Virginia society, he's a model gentleman. He serves on the county council. His family occupies the front pew at the Presbyterian Church every Sunday. His wife hosts elaborate dinner parties where politicians and businessmen discuss the future of the South. But among the 147 souls he holds in bondage, Colonel Blackwood is known by a different reputation entirely. They call him the Silencer, though never within earshot of anyone who might carry the name back to the main house. They've learned through bitter experience that certain knowledge, certain observations, certain truths make people disappear. Old Moses, nearly 70 years old, remembers the estate under Blackwood's father. He tells the younger generation that things have gotten worse. The elder Blackwood was cruel, certainly. Enslavement itself is cruelty. But the son has added something more calculated, something more sinister. The father treated us like animals, Moses whispers to those he trusts. The son treats us like witnesses who must be eliminated. No one knows exactly when it started. There's disagreement about the first disappearance. Some say it was Thomas, a blacksmith who worked in the property's forge. Others insist it was Rebecca, a house servant who cleaned the colonel's study. What everyone agrees on is this: people who saw too much, who heard too much, who learned too much, simply vanished without explanation. The official story was always the same. They ran away, they escaped north, they were sold to traders heading west. But the enslaved community knew better. Runners left signs. Escapees sent word back through the Underground Railroad's secret networks. Sold individuals could sometimes be traced through the extensive informal communication networks that connected enslaved people across state lines. These people left no trace at all, as if they'd never existed. The Blackwood estate sat at a crossroads of commerce and corruption. The main road connecting Richmond to the Tennessee Territories ran directly past the property. Travelers frequently stopped. Businessmen conducting deals, slave traders moving people south and west, men with questions and few scruples about the answers, and Colonel Blackwood accommodated them all. The estate had become more than a cotton plantation. It had become a hub for activities that transgressed even the already loose legal boundaries of the time. This is where our story truly begins, with a young woman named Sarah who possessed a dangerous gift. She could read. Sarah arrived at Blackwood Estate in 1839, sold at age 14 from a property in Maryland where she'd been born. Her mother had been a house servant, owned by a Quaker family with complicated views on slavery. They opposed the institution philosophically, but participated in it practically, a contradiction that defined much of American life in that era. That Quaker family's daughter had secretly taught Sarah's mother to read, and Sarah's mother had passed that knowledge to her daughter. They knew it was dangerous. In Virginia, as in most southern states, teaching enslaved people to read was illegal. The penalty could be severe: whipping, branding, sale away from family. But Sarah's mother believed knowledge was the only inheritance she could give her daughter. When Sarah was torn from her mother and sold south, she carried two things: the ability to read and the wisdom to hide it absolutely. For 3 years, Sarah worked in the fields. She picked cotton during harvest, tended tobacco plants in spring, did whatever labor was demanded. She kept her head down, spoke little, attracted no attention. She watched, she learned, she survived. Then, in 1842, the head cook in the main house died suddenly. The colonel's wife needed a replacement who could follow written recipes from her collection of cookbooks. Most enslaved women couldn't read, but someone remembered that Sarah's previous owner had been Quakers, and sometimes Quakers educated their servants. When questioned, Sarah made a calculated decision. She admitted she could read a little, enough to follow recipes, not enough to threaten anyone. The colonel's wife was delighted. Sarah moved from the fields to the kitchen. Working in the main house changed everything. Sarah now moved through spaces where white people spoke freely, assuming enslaved servants were either deaf or too simple to understand the implications of what they heard. She cleaned rooms where documents lay scattered on desks. She served meals where business deals were negotiated over bourbon and tobacco. And she began to notice discrepancies. The colonel kept meticulous records. Ledgers tracked every penny spent, every bale of cotton sold, every enslaved person bought or sold. These books sat in his study, carefully organized on mahogany shelves. When Sarah dusted that room, she couldn't help but see the neat columns of numbers, the dated entries, the careful accounting, but something didn't add up. Literally. Sarah had a good memory. In her months working in the house, she'd learned the names of everyone enslaved on the property. 147 people. She knew them all, but the most recent ledger listed 162, 15 people on paper who didn't exist in reality. She might have dismissed it as a clerical error, except she noticed something else. Between 1839 and 1842, the ledger recorded the sale of 23 enslaved individuals, standard practice for plantation owners managing cash flow or difficult people. But Sarah had been on the property since 39. She knew every person who'd left through sale or escape. She could name them all. The number was wrong. The ledger claimed 23, but Sarah could only account for 11 actual sales. She'd either witnessed the departure directly or heard reliable first-hand accounts from those who had. 12 people had been listed as sold who were never actually sold, and 15 people were currently counted on the property roster who didn't exist. The numbers haunted her. She became obsessed with understanding what they meant. Every opportunity she had in the study, she looked more carefully at the records. She discovered that the phantom sales always involved traders passing through the property. Men whose names appeared once or twice, then disappeared from the records. No consistent buyers, no traceable destinations. Then she found the correspondence file. Hidden behind the main ledgers sat a slim leather portfolio containing letters. Most were routine business communications, but several letters from 1839 caught her attention. They discussed the importation of enslaved people from Africa, something that had been illegal in the United States since 1808. The international slave trade had been outlawed for more than 30 years, but the domestic trade flourished. Demand exceeded supply, especially as cotton cultivation expanded westward. Prices for enslaved people had risen dramatically, which created opportunity for men willing to break the law. These letters suggested that Colonel Blackwood had participated in smuggling operations, bringing illegally imported Africans through Virginia and selling them into the Deep South. The profits were extraordinary. The risks were manageable if witnesses could be controlled. Sarah understood immediately what the phantom numbers represented. The 15 extra people on the roster were smuggled individuals being held temporarily before transport south. The 12 false sales weren't sales at all. They were murders disguised as transactions. People who'd seen the smuggled Africans, people who'd overheard conversations, people who'd witnessed things they shouldn't have witnessed. They'd been eliminated, and paperwork had been created to explain their absence. Sarah had stumbled onto systematic murder masquerading as plantation management. She knew this knowledge would kill her. What would you do in Sarah's position? Would you stay silent to survive? Would you risk everything to expose the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective on impossible choices. Sarah understood she couldn't speak openly about what she'd discovered. The question was whether she could stay silent convincingly enough to avoid suspicion. Fear became her constant companion. Every time the colonel looked at her, she wondered if he could see the knowledge in her eyes. Every time she entered his study, she feared he'd notice how her hands trembled. But Colonel Blackwood had created something far more insidious than simple fear. He'd built an entire system designed to identify potential problems before they became actual threats. And Sarah was about to discover how sophisticated that system was. The overseer, a man named Cunningham, had been with the estate for 6 years. He was known for his ability to sense troublemakers before they caused trouble. What the enslaved community didn't fully understand was that Cunningham had informants everywhere. He'd created a network of people who reported suspicious behavior in exchange for small privileges, extra food rations, easier work assignments, protection from the worst punishments. Some provided information out of fear, others out of desperation. A few out of calculated self-interest. Enslavement created impossible moral situations. When your own survival and your family's safety hang in the balance, when you're already living in hell, betraying another person's confidence might seem like the least terrible option available. Marcus was one of Cunningham's informants, a field hand in his 30s. He'd been born on the property. His wife and 3 children were there. 5 years earlier, his eldest son had been caught stealing food from the smokehouse. The standard punishment was whipping, but Cunningham offered Marcus a deal: provide regular reports about conversations in the quarters, and the boy would be spared. Marcus made the calculation that countless people in impossible situations have made throughout history. He betrayed others to protect his own. He hated himself for it, but he did it anyway. Sarah didn't know about Marcus. She didn't know about the 3 other informants working the fields, or the 2 house servants who reported to Cunningham, or the driver named Jacob who'd been promised his freedom in exchange for years of intelligence gathering. She thought she was being careful when she quietly asked old Moses if he remembered anyone disappearing who was supposed to have been sold. She thought she was being subtle when she mentioned to another kitchen worker that the Colonel's records sometimes seemed inconsistent. She thought she was being smart when she tried to count how many new faces had appeared and vanished over recent months. Within 2 weeks, Cunningham knew that Sarah was asking questions. He didn't know specifically what she'd discovered, but he knew she'd discovered something. That was enough. The Colonel's system for handling threats had been refined over years. It wasn't crude or obvious. People didn't simply vanish from the main house where their absence would be immediately noticed. The process was gradual, carefully staged. First, Sarah found herself reassigned, no longer kitchen work, back to the fields. The explanation was simple. Another servant had experience that made her better suited for the kitchen. Sarah's reading skills were no longer needed. It seemed like bad luck, not a death sentence. In the fields, she was placed in a crew that worked the most distant acreage, nearly a mile from the quarters. The crew was supervised by a man named Fletcher, who'd been hired 6 months earlier. Fletcher had previously worked in the Deep South, on Mississippi cotton plantations, where death rates among enslaved workers were among the highest in the nation. He'd learned to push people beyond human limits. He'd learned that if workers died from exhaustion or heat stroke, you simply bought new ones. Sarah lasted 2 weeks before she collapsed. Heat exhaustion, the doctor said. She needed rest. She was taken to a small, isolated cabin near the property's edge, supposedly to recover away from the heat of the crowded quarters. This was standard procedure. The isolation cabin had been used many times before. It stood alone, surrounded by dense woods, far from the main areas of the estate. People went there to recover, and then, quietly, they disappeared. Sometimes a grave was dug in the woods. Sometimes bodies were weighted and dropped in the river that formed the property's southern boundary. Sometimes they were burned. The official record would show that Sarah had been sold. Papers would be forged, showing a transaction with a trader heading to Alabama. The numbers in the ledger would balance perfectly. But Sarah had one advantage the Colonel didn't know about. During her months in the kitchen, she'd formed a quiet friendship with another servant named Ruth. Ruth had her own secrets. Her husband had escaped north 3 years earlier, and she maintained contact through a network connected to the Underground Railroad. Ruth had watched Sarah being reassigned, had seen the pattern that others missed, and she understood what was coming. The night before Sarah was to be moved to the isolation cabin, Ruth came to her in the fields after dark. She whispered urgently, "They mean to kill you. When they take you to that cabin tomorrow, you won't come back. Everyone who goes there dies." Sarah had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her blood run cold. Ruth continued, "I can't save you, but I can make sure your death means something. Tell me what you know. I'll get word to people who can use it." Sarah made another impossible choice. She told Ruth everything. The phantom numbers in the ledger, the evidence of smuggling, the pattern of murders disguised as sales. She spoke quickly, knowing this might be her last conversation. Ruth committed every detail to memory. Then Ruth did something extraordinary. She didn't just promise to remember. She made contact with a free black man named William, who occasionally sold produce to the estate. William had connections to abolitionists in Richmond. Ruth passed him the information. William got it to people who could document it, preserve it, use it as evidence. Sarah went to the isolation cabin the next morning. She never came back. The ledger recorded her sale to a trader named Simmons for $950. No such sale ever occurred, but the truth she'd discovered didn't die with her. It survived. hidden in the memories and records of people who understood that bearing witness mattered, even when justice seemed impossible. Before we continue with what happened next, we want to thank you for staying with this difficult story. We know this isn't easy history to confront, but the best and most important part is still ahead. What happened when the truth Sarah died protecting finally came to light? Stay with us. For more than 170 years, the secrets of Blackwood Estate remained buried. The property passed through various owners after the Civil War. The main house fell into disrepair during reconstruction. By the 1920s, the land had been subdivided and sold. Cotton fields became pasture, then forest. The quarters were torn down. Most physical evidence of what had occurred there vanished beneath decades of vegetation and development. But history has a way of resurfacing. In 2012, a construction company began work on a luxury housing development on a 100-acre parcel that had once been part of the original Blackwood Estate. They were digging foundations when heavy machinery struck something that wasn't supposed to be there. Bones, human bones, dozens of them. Construction immediately halted. State archaeologists were called in. What they discovered over the following 18 months of excavation would confirm the whispered stories that had persisted in local African-American communities for generations. They'd found a burial site, but this wasn't an ordinary cemetery with marked graves and respectful interment. This was a dumping ground for bodies. 57 individuals in total, buried in unmarked graves at irregular intervals and depths. No coffins, no grave goods, no markers. Some bodies showed evidence of having been wrapped in cloth or sacks. Others appeared to have been simply covered with dirt. The forensic analysis was damning. 23 of the skeletons showed clear evidence of violent death. Fractured skulls from blunt force trauma. Broken neck vertebrae consistent with hanging, cut marks on bones from sharp weapons. These people had been murdered. The remains could be dated through various methods to the 1830s and 1840s, the exact period when Colonel James Blackwood controlled the property. The age range of victims was broad. Children as young as 10, adults in their 20s and 30s, elderly individuals in their 60s, men and women both. Archaeologists cross-referenced their findings with historical records. They discovered the meticulous ledgers that Colonel Blackwood had kept, preserved in Virginia's state archives. They found the exact discrepancies that Sarah had noticed 170 years earlier. The phantom sales, the inconsistent numbers, the documented transactions with traders who left no trace in any other historical records. But they also found something Sarah hadn't seen, a separate set of personal journals that Blackwood's grandson had donated to the State Historical Society in 1905. That grandson, writing decades after the Civil War, had included a memoir section about his grandfather. In it, he'd written something chilling. Grandfather maintained order through calculated fear. He kept certain activities hidden from public knowledge, and he ensured that those who witnessed these activities could never testify to them. He considered it a form of operational security, no different than a general protecting military secrets. In his view, the greater good of maintaining plantation productivity justified the elimination of potential witnesses. The grandson hadn't meant this as a confession. He'd written it as a point of family pride, demonstrating his grandfather's business acumen. He couldn't conceive that future readers would see these words as an admission of serial murder. DNA analysis on the remains, cross-referenced with genealogical records and DNA samples from descendants of people who'd been enslaved at Blackwood Estate, provided matches in 11 cases. Families finally had confirmation of what had happened to ancestors who'd been listed in historical records as sold away or run off. Among those identified was a young woman in her late teens or early 20s, buried in the section of the site that corresponded to the early 1840s. Her skeleton showed signs of severe physical stress in the weeks before death. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, collapse. The pattern fit with hard field labor following years of lighter work. The cause of death appeared to be manual strangulation. While positive identification was impossible due to limited DNA matches, archaeologists believed this might be Sarah, a young woman who'd worked in the house, who'd been suddenly reassigned to brutal field labor, who'd died at approximately the right time and been buried without record. But Sarah's story, or rather the story of what she'd discovered, had another chapter. Researchers working on the excavation project found references in abolitionist newspapers from the 1840s to rumors about a Virginia plantation engaged in illegal slave smuggling and the murder of witnesses. The articles were vague, lacking specific names or locations, but the details matched. They traced these articles back to testimony given to abolitionist societies in Richmond by individuals connected to the Underground Railroad network. The information had come through channels that protected sources, but it had gotten out. Sarah's sacrifice hadn't been meaningless. The truth she'd died protecting had reached people who tried to expose it, even if justice proved impossible during her lifetime. The archaeological discovery at the former Blackwood estate became a major news story in 2013 and 2014. It was covered by national media. Documentaries were made. The site was designated a historical landmark. Memorial services were held for the 57 people whose remains had been found. But perhaps most importantly, it sparked a broader conversation about the hidden history of slavery. How much of what happened in those years remains buried, literally and figuratively? How many other sites like this exist, waiting to be discovered? How many stories like Sarah's have been lost forever? The excavation also revealed something about the scale of Colonel Blackwood's operation. Financial records, when fully analyzed, suggested he'd been involved in smuggling at least 200 illegally imported Africans through Virginia between 1838 and 1850. The profit from these operations had been extraordinary, possibly exceeding $200,000, equivalent to millions today. And the 57 bodies in the unmarked cemetery? They were the cost of keeping that operation secret. Enslaved people who'd seen smuggled Africans arrive at the estate, traders who'd demanded higher cuts of profits, free black workers who'd been hired for specific tasks and witnessed too much, even poor white workers who'd been brought in for temporary jobs and learned things they shouldn't have known. Blackwood hadn't discriminated in his willingness to kill. Anyone who threatened his operation was eliminated. The only thing that mattered was protecting the secret and protecting the profit. The story of Blackwood Estate is horrifying, but it's critical to understand that this wasn't an isolated case. It wasn't the work of one uniquely evil man. It was a predictable consequence of a system that treated human beings as property and created conditions where violence became routine and witnesses became liabilities. Across the slaveholding South, similar patterns existed. Archaeological excavations at other plantation sites have revealed unmarked burials with evidence of violent death. Historical records from other properties show the same kinds of numerical discrepancies that Sarah noticed. Abolitionist newspapers from the era are filled with reports of enslaved people who vanished without explanation. The systematic nature of this violence is what should terrify us most. Colonel Blackwood didn't act on impulse or passion. He created a deliberate infrastructure of murder. He kept careful records, even if coded. He employed multiple people in the operation. He refined his methods over years. This was organized, calculated, business-like elimination of human beings, and it was all perfectly legal under the framework of slavery. Enslaved people couldn't testify against white people in court. They had no legal standing to file complaints. Authorities who might have investigated crimes committed against white citizens showed no interest in crimes committed against enslaved people. The law itself provided cover for atrocity. This is what makes the courage of people like Sarah so extraordinary. She knew that exposing the truth wouldn't bring justice. She knew the legal system wouldn't protect her. She knew she would die. But she chose to document what she discovered anyway, to pass that knowledge to someone who might preserve it, on the slim hope that someday, somehow, it might matter. And it did matter. 170 years after her death, the truth came out. The murders were confirmed. The victims were acknowledged. The system that enabled this horror was exposed in detail that no one could dismiss or minimize. But we have to ask ourselves difficult questions. How many other Sarahs were there? How many people discovered dangerous truths and tried to pass them along, but their information never reached anyone who could preserve it? How many victims of this system remain literally and figuratively buried, their stories lost forever? The archaeological work continues. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have been conducted at hundreds of former plantation sites across the South. Many show evidence of unmarked burials. Most haven't been excavated yet due to cost, complexity, and legal issues around disturbing grave sites. But they're there, holding their secrets beneath the soil. Some descendants of enslaved people have mixed feelings about these excavations. Finding evidence of ancestors' murder brings a kind of closure, confirmation of stories passed down through generations. But it also means confronting horrific details about how their ancestors died. It means acknowledging that justice in any meaningful sense is impossible because everyone directly responsible has been dead for more than a century. Yet there's value in bringing these truths to light. The Blackwood Estate excavation led to changes in how history is taught in Virginia schools. It sparked conversations about memorialization and historical acknowledgement. It prompted other states to fund archaeological surveys of sites connected to slavery. It contributed to a broader national reckoning with America's history of racial violence. And it reminds us of something vitally important. The suppression of truth through violence is not ancient history. It's a tactic that continues to be used by those in power who fear accountability. Understanding how it worked in the past helps us recognize and resist it in the present. Sarah couldn't have known that the information she risked everything to preserve would eventually be confirmed by DNA analysis and ground-penetrating radar and archaeological excavation. She died believing she'd failed, that Blackwood's secrets would remain buried forever. But she was wrong. Truth has a way of surfacing, even if it takes generations. The memorial at the former Blackwood Estate site includes a plaque with 57 names, most listed as unknown. But one plaque specifically honors the people who tried to expose the truth during the slavery era, knowing they would pay with their lives. It doesn't name Sarah because her identity can't be confirmed with certainty, but it acknowledges that people like her existed. That resistance took many forms. That bearing witness in the face of death was its own form of heroism. The last line of that plaque reads, "They could bury the bodies, but they could not bury the truth forever." History has proven that statement accurate. The question we must each ask ourselves is this: what truths in our own time are people in power trying to bury? What witnesses are being silenced? And what responsibility do we have to pay attention, to remember, to speak out, even when it's costly? The 57 people found in that unmarked cemetery can't answer those questions, but their discovery poses them to all of us. Their silence demands that we refuse to stay silent about injustice in our own era. Their buried truth challenges us to uncover and confront difficult histories rather than leaving them hidden, because that's what people like Sarah died trying to tell us. Truth matters, even when the cost of telling it is everything. Now, we want to hear from you. How do you think we should memorialize historical atrocities like this? What responsibility do we have to uncover buried truths, even when they're painful? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your perspective adds to this important conversation. If you found this story important, please subscribe to our channel for more deep explorations of hidden history. Hit the like button to help this story reach more people. And make sure to watch the next recommended video where we explore another chapter of history that has been deliberately obscured. Thank you for taking this journey with us. These stories aren't easy, but they're necessary. History doesn't change unless we're willing to look at it honestly, no matter how difficult that examination might be.